Well, hello and welcome to See Hear Love. I'm your host, Melinda, and today you're invited to witness and to listen to one of the most beautiful and inspiring love stories that we have ever heard here on See Hear Love. Our guest, Heather Smythe, was diagnosed with cancer 20 years ago and received a bone marrow transplant 8 years ago. And her husband, Jeff, knew she had cancer when they first began dating, but chose to love and marry Heather no matter what the outcome. Heather believes that we are all created, knit together by God on purpose and for a purpose. And it's a perfect mission statement for her, considering she's an avid knitter. Now, this show aired previously only online on SeeHearLove.com and on our See Hear Love YouTube channel, and has been one of our top watched online shows by viewers all over the world. So, I hope you enjoyed this very special show, this beautiful and inspiring journey of challenge, hope, faith, obedience, perseverance, and commitment. Here's episode number 42, Choosing One Another, a Cancer Love Story.
I just finished Bible college, finished a 4-year degree, came back home, and within that year was diagnosed with leukemia. And the type of leukemia that I was diagnosed with is generally found in senior men, and so I didn't really fit into that category at all.
Wow. No, you did not.
Right?
Okay.
And I never will. And so at the time, I said, I don't think I knew anyone with cancer. I didn't have any great aunts or, people at my church. I didn't know anybody who had cancer. It was entirely a brand new thing for me. And so I was diagnosed this summer and began to start chemotherapy in January of that following year. And I remember writing in my journal, like, this isn't fair. And really wrestling that out with God. I had plans. I was going to be a teacher. I was going to get married and have 2 children. And I started out my life all mapped out, and these are the things that I wanted to do. And God interrupted that to say, I got different plans, Heather. And believe it or not, they're actually better than the plans that you've made for yourself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Better?
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I don't know how that would have played out, right? But I honestly believe that, even in the midst of all of this, that this is a better plan than what I could have come up with on my own.
How long did chemo and radiation take? What was that?
So I've only had chemotherapy up until my bone marrow transplant 7 years ago, and we've lost count a little bit of how many different types of chemotherapies I've had. I had had the one chemotherapy prior to meeting Jeff. We met probably a year and a half after I had been diagnosed, and then once we met and were married, very quickly started chemotherapy again, and then that's where we sort of lost count.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's somewhere between 15 and 20 times.
Really?
In regards to chemo, radiation, and whatnot.
And so you met while you were in the midst of this. You meet this guy. This guy meets this girl.
She was desperate.
Well, where did you meet? How did you? What was the location?
Well, I was a youth pastor at the time at a church in Orangeville, and Heather was volunteering, and we went up to a junior high retreat, and it's all the churches come together, and so we were there, and Heather came up, and I had previously worked with her sister at Muskogee Bible Conference, and she came up and said, "Hi, you may not remember me. I'm Pam's sister," and we kind of chatted it up, and I was like, "Oh, that's great." And I said, "Hey, my mom lives close to you. Could I get your phone number?" And so, I was pretty suave when I was young, and very romantic.
My mom lives close.
So when I'm there, maybe I could also come and see you.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Didn't want to really promise too much. Yeah. Didn't want to get my hopes up too high, or hers, apparently. So. But anyways, we came back home, and that next week I called and left a message at her house. And the funny thing is that her youth pastor that she volunteered with, his name was Jeff as well. So when I called, I left a message. I said, "Hey, it's Jeff. Can you give me a call?" And she called her youth pastor.
And you're probably going.
And he had no idea.
No, I didn't know that she did that until later, and then she figured out who it was. And
I didn't call you.
So.
And you didn't call. How long did it take from, the number to then you actually go on your first date?
It was probably
that week, because we started dating the end of January, and then we're married at Christmas. So.
Oh, okay.
Wow. So, at what point when is this a first date, a fifth date? When it's always these rules of dating and when you're supposed to talk about certain topics. So, when did this when did you start to learn, Jeff, about sort of her health situation?
It was quite funny because I had I had my day off at the church, and I was supposed to go down and meet Heather and have dinner. And a crisis came up at our church, and a senior man who had CLL was rushed to hospital, and so I had to go and be with him. So I asked her to come up and join me for dinner, and so I'm talking with her over dinner about
the senior man,
and she was like, "Oh, by the way,
oh,
wow,
here's what I have." And I knew there had been some health issues with Heather, based on working with her sister and different things, but I didn't know the full extent. And so over the course of dinner that night, probably an hour and a half, I got a real heavy-duty lesson and education on where she was in her health and leukemia. And it was interesting, just the fact that I had come from being in a hospital room with a senior man, same cancer, and then going, wait, what?
Wow.
You have the same cancer that this guy has. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Now, at that time when you were having your little talk, was there these feelings like, I could see myself with this person for life, marriage? Like when this is all unfolding, are you falling for this handsome guy here? Are you falling for, like, what's going on? Because you know where I'm going, because then you're going to be confronted with some decisions. So
so I remember our first date, driving home and realizing that Jeff was a game changer. So that if it wasn't Jeff, it was someone who, like, he'd raised the bar, do you know what I mean, in terms of character and all those things. And so I was really hoping at that point it was Jeff. I was 28 at the time. I had cancer, so I didn't really know that I had a whole lot of options.
Like I said, she was desperate.
I don't know that I had ever thought that I would marry. I didn't know if I would even be living a year from now. Like, do you know what I mean? I just never had any of those answers. At the same time, though, recognizing that God had a plan and He would figure that out. But when I met Jeff on that first date, it was a game changer. And so I knew that if it wasn't Jeff, it was someone like Jeff. And it turned out to be Jeff.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, she's feeling this way. Now you're having a conversation that, you know, has cancer, and your thoughts as this is happening, because you must be like, okay.
And that was our second date.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what's going
Second
on?
date.
Because you're obviously, we know the outcome. You guys are married, but talk about the bit of the thinking process of this.
Yeah, so I had some great friends that I processed with and just chatted it through. And I remember back in my days at seminary when one of my professors, right at the beginning of the semester, he pulled out 1 Samuel 15:22, and he said, "Is it better to obey or sacrifice for God?" And I'm like, wow, that's a great question. And so we're all like, obey? Like, is that the right answer? And he said, right, and that's the right answer for this class as well. However, that verse kind of really impacted me. And so regardless of my sacrifices, whether it's sacrifice of time or the things that I do for God, it actually ultimately came down to my obedience and that response to God. So as I processed with my friends, that whole verse came up, and I was really confronted with the difference between my wants and, but I can do this for you, God, if you provide this, right? And I was then confronted where God just ultimately said, this is what I want you to do. And and so this same couple that I had been journeying with and challenging this whole conversation with around marrying Heather, because we actually had that conversation. I went to their wedding, and I did their wedding over in England, and I'm sitting in a train station in London. I'm sitting on the floor waiting for my train, and all of a sudden this thought just hit me, and I said, it was just the thought of where I cannot see my life without Heather. And I went, okay, so I got up and I called Heather and just chatted, and that was it. And then I probably within a couple of weeks had a ring and asked her dad if it was okay if I married his daughter. He was quite excited, actually, so that was good.
Cheered.
He did.
Now, the cancer part, were you like thinking ahead, how are we going to navigate this? Am I going to lose her soon? I mean, those must be honest thoughts.
Yeah.
Or was it more like, I'm going to obey, go for it, just see what happens? Or because those are, again, about choices and how we choose joy, how we choose obedience, how we choose these things. but as a human, those are real things you would have had to wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something that I went through, because up until then, it was funny even going back to God calling me into ministry and where I was at the time at a church. And I hated hospitals, hated going there. And it was funny because now all of a sudden with God presenting me with this option, and whether I obeyed or not was really my choice, right? It really wasn't up to God. And so I just really wrestled through it and was like, is this what I want for the rest of my life? And I had to go back right to the beginning and saying, okay, first of all, not the beginning of Genesis, but the beginning of my life, and just saying, God called me first to himself. I responded in obedience to him. And then what is true about God? And looking back at all these spiritual markers that have been throughout my life that have guided me, and realize that all these people along the way and through scripture and with my prayer life, that God has been very faithful in what I've been doing and in my obedient response to him. So it certainly was hard. I'm not going to deny that. I wrestled very much with it. But ultimately submitted myself to God and said, okay, I give up. I give up on this. I'm not going to fight my own expectations on this, right? If this is what you want, then I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And she's worth it.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
That makes me a little teary.
So I mean,
Beautiful.
you guys have been through a long journey together. You've, in the first few years even of your marriage, there was probably more to deal with than some people would deal with in 20 or 30 years of marriage. So, I mean, we could talk about this for all day, but we don't have that kind of time. So I guess I'm just curious about, like, what are the big, the lessons, or like, what are the things that you say to other people that you've learned about doing this together? For both of you, maybe Heather, like what is it that you've learned about marriage and relationships out of this journey?
Yeah. One of the things that Jeff and I would always talk about is our new normal. And so my health was changing so constantly. We would, learn to figure something out, and like, oh no, now it's changed. There's a new diagnosis, a new medication, a new type of reaction that I would have. And so now we need to adapt to who we are and what we are based on those. And so being fluid with our expectations of what today is going to look like and tomorrow's going to look like, and going on from there. But at the same time, just recognizing that God's the one who has all of our days planned out for us. And so I've written about it before that I've talked to lots of people who've had bone marrow transplants, and they said, like, I've been given a new life, or I feel like, I've sort of, I'm living on borrowed time. And I just really recognize that God has already ordained all the days of my life, and my job is to live today. Because I've got today, I don't have tomorrow yet. And so knowing that in the midst of your own story and circumstances, that God's got it. He's not surprised by where you are. He already saw it and is actively working for your good, right? Yeah.
What was the greatest thing that helped you, that Jeff did while you went through this? Like, I mean, there's so many things that you need from a partner and spouse, but what would you say is sort of the greatest thing? It could be small, it could be big, that really helped you along in this.
Yeah, I mean, I had to really trust Jeff. There was lots of times when because I would always feel so much better than I had before, and he would say, I recognize that you see yourself sort of like this. You're wearing these colored glasses, but I've got a different view of where you are. And so I had to really trust Jeff to say, yes, I really know you want to go out tonight to this event or to this to a church service or to whatever, but you can't do that tonight. And so really loved his boundaries for me, and because I loved and trusted him, even though I didn't always like it, had to recognize that, okay, those boundaries are good. And there was times when I wouldn't listen, and we'd go out and to leave early or get sick as a result. And
Just like, yes,
yeah, it's all,
yes.
I mean, that face says it all, right?
The face is like, but I told you.
Right, but and even as I meet people in the hospital now, and I'll talk to husbands and wives, and I'll tell you, you need to, as the person who's sick, you need to listen to your spouse and to trust that they have your good in mind. It's not they're trying to hold you back from something that you think is more exciting, but like truly they've got your back. Yeah. And certainly that's what Jeff has been for me. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Jeff, as a support person, because a lot of times the story is about the person going through the crisis and the trauma. It's their story. But, talking with some friends, it's like, and even you have, it's like the story, her story, your story, because there's different perspectives on a situation. And I'm so glad that both of you could be here because, honoring both in the story. But for you, Jeff, when you're thinking through this and, thinking about viewers and people who are the support person, what would be your encouragement or advice to them as they journey through this?
Yeah, I think being a caregiver is exhausting. I remember it was years later after Heather had her bone marrow transplant, and we joked around with her sister, and her sister said, what did you do about potty training for Nathan? And she said, I had a bone marrow transplant because I did that, right?
Yeah.
Because she was so sick, and so there was a lot of weight that I took on, and a lot of responsibility. I would actually give a couple things. One is allow margin in your life. Because you have so many unexpected things that can come up, right? So don't be so busy that say, well, I have to volunteer here, or now I'm responsible here. It's like, make that margin pretty big. Go through the big things. I would always use the illustration with Heather, and I think it's the same for caregivers as well, is that when you're on a plane, and if the oxygen masks come down, your responsibility is to put your mask on first so you could help other people.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me as a caregiver, I had to take care of myself so that I could help Heather, I could help my son at that time. So that involved being part of our faith community at our church, having a trusted group of friends, mostly guys, where we would go out and do guy things. And Nathan would have a babysitter, and I would go out and just hang out with them. And it was great. We had a great group of people at that time that journeyed with us and with me, that cared for me. And I had those people, I had probably 3 key guys that it was like at any time I could call, text, we could talk. And that's what I needed, right?
Yeah.
And everybody needs that, right? But, our own health is very important, not only physical, but mental as well, right? But it's having that community around you, because you can't do it on your own. There's no way.
Yeah.
If you do, you try and help everybody, and in the end of that process or journey, you'll end up hurting everybody because you'll run out.
Right.
Right? Energy, spiritual strength, everything. You'll be done. Right?
Yeah.
That is really good advice. And I didn't even think about that. That, because a lot of people would be caring, and just be like, I'm second. This is the focus. But then for the caregiver, there would be a time where you would completely burn out if you don't care for yourself.
Yeah, and it took my best friend, Paul, to actually say that to me. And Heather was just about to go into her bone marrow transplant, and Paul and I have been friends since I was young. And he said to me, he goes, so what is your plan to take care of yourself? And the question shocked me. Like, I was like, oh, because I had never thought about it, right? Because like you said, my primary thought and my primary focus was going to care for Heather and care for Nathan. And so then out one night, we're just like, okay, and we put a plan in place, and we put a support team around, a caregiving team that not only helped me, but also helped our family.
Right.
And that conversation was, a game changer. For me as a caregiver.
Yeah. And for the whole family, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it changed
There's a ripple
you.
effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ripple. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and I found support online too. With going through. There's a great website called caregiving.com. It's from Chicago, and I still communicate with a lot of people on there. It's a fantastic. It's not faith-based, but it's very supportive but it's all about caregivers, right?
As you've journeyed through this, you have one another, you have a community, but as far as just, and Heather, you're so great about this gift of faith, but are there verses or characteristics of God that kind of sustained you? Like what, because there's a part of there's so much a human can really help and support you, and then you've got to kind of go, I've got to go to God because they're not meeting all my needs, and so any verse or promise that really you were like, this is a good anchor for us, anchor for me individually. What would you say?
Yeah, one of the verses that always sticks out to me is the verses that talk about God being hiding us under the shelter of his wings. And so for me, for so many years, the hospital was like a second home to me, and in a really good way. I really, it was like, when I go back, it's like coming home after being away for a long time. And I really began, one of the ways that God speaks to me is through pictures, and he'll say, this picture here is just like this, what I said in the Bible. And so one of the pictures he gave me is of a hospital room, and the hospital room being the safest place for me at those times when I was, there was lots of times when I was there for, a week on end or whatever with pneumonia or with the transplant complications, and just recognizing that, I used to say that the walls were covered with his feathers, because a mother hides her babies under her wings for the softest, most protective spot for them. In the same way, that hospital room was the shelter of his protection. And so I often, when I speak with children about who are in hospital or talk to other family members who are in hospital, say that the hospital room is like, open your eyes and see the feathers of God's faithfulness that are just covered on those walls. That's the safest place for you today.
Wow.
That's good, because a lot of people would be like,
Get me out of here.
Get me out of here.
Yeah.
The hospital is not that safe
Sure.
place. But it's, again, changing the circumstances for God to really work and protect. I love that.
Yeah,
the
I mean, God
protection
has been so close to me in hospital. Yeah, he's there. You just got to open. I mean, he's here with us now, right? You just need to open your eyes and see.
That's good.
Yeah.
Jeff, what about you?
I think for me, the biggest thing was, especially during the beginning and even going through the bone marrow transplant with Heather, I was just in awestruck of David and just the emotional wrestling that he did. And he's like, where have you gone? And what is going on? And Psalm 139 is the big thing for me. And that chapter was just huge. I would go back to that. That was my, people would ask me, friends would ask me, what are you reading? Psalm 139. Weren't you reading that yesterday? Yes, I was. And I'm reading it again, right? Because it was just so reassuring to me of who God is. Because God knew, God didn't change when Heather got diagnosed. He stayed the same, right? Only our circumstances changed, and only her circumstances changed. So with every new normal, with every new circumstance that we came to, God still remained the same. Nothing was new for him, right? He was the same, but it was new for us. So coming to that place, but the other side for me too is I'm very tactile, right? So if you tell me something, I'm like, okay, yeah, but show me, right? So for me to believe something is going to happen, I'm like, okay, show me, let me touch it, let me feel it. And so even with Heather in her gift of faith, in the beginning, that was a real struggle for me, right? Because she'd be like, no, but I believe God. Here's what his word says. And I would, and I'm like, I lean more to the Thomas side of things. It's like, let me reach out and touch that and make sure that that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a real emotional and mental change for me in regards to understanding who God is. God is very different to me today than he was when we first got married.
Right.
And even before the bone marrow transplant, because even as we went into the bone marrow transplant, we went away on a retreat and basically said, we're gonna pray if this is really what God wants us to do. And while we're on retreat, individually, God said, this is what I want you to do. And we had to surrender the results of that. Regardless of whether Heather lived or not, we knew that it was an obedience thing. It was.
Was it to that point that if you didn't have the bone marrow transplant, you could die, or if you had it, you could die? Like what?
Both and.
Yeah,
really,
when the lady sat us down for our initial meeting, she started off with, a bone marrow transplant is a terrible and awful procedure. Let's begin. Okay.
Yeah.
And she was true to her word.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the statistics of it, like, it's the great thing is, we were at Princess Margaret here in Toronto, which is a fantastic hospital, and we were with the best doctors for the bone marrow transplant team, but the statistics are not good, right? Like they walk in and they say, in day one, you have this statistic to live or not. You have this statistic to either accept the bone marrow transplant or not accept the bone marrow transplant. So when it came to the choice of the bone marrow transplant, her oncologist actually said, okay, we've only got about 1 or 2 more chemo tries before your body becomes chemo resistant. As soon as your body becomes chemo resistant, bone marrow transplant's off the table. Can't do it. And he said, so you have to make a choice soon. So that's when we went away on retreat. And we came to that, it's like, we wrestled with it. Is this what God is saying to us?
And I love that, like every step we're hearing, like God was part of the conversation. And together, separate, like seeking Him, looking to be obedient to what He would have you do.
Yeah, and
In every medical decision, every marital decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes and I don't want to, because I'm the tactile one, right? So I also don't want to gloss it over and say it was a great faith or trust in God, because I did have those conversations with God and said, what are you doing? Like, why am I in this situation? I know I obeyed you and said, yeah, okay, I'll marry this girl, but are you nuts? Like, I had those conversations saying, this is a real difficult thing. Like, you want me to now surrender. Not only we just had our first child, but now you want to put me to put my wife on the block and go, this could happen.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a real tough emotional thing for me, right? And it's things that we talked about and went through, and so we, and we continue to have, but we've had some real open and raw conversations of good emotional health and bad emotional health, right? Of just going, what is going on? Oh, isn't this great?
Well, and because we see our story from different perspectives, right? Me from lying in the hospital bed, and then Jeff from caring for me. Like we often tell the same story with two different, these are the facts of the story, but the interpretation from his vantage point and from mine look like two totally different stories, right?
As we conclude the show, I just want to say how inspiring it is, because statistics say that when couples go through very difficult things, they don't usually last.
That's right.
And I know in hearing the story and seeing you together, how long have you now been married?
15 and a half years.
Look at you, nicely done, 15 and a half years. It's incredible because, again, the choosing of one another, the covenant that you made and the choosing, no matter how difficult, getting quite emotional, how difficult it can be, you still chose each other. And I think that's key, because in a society where if it's hard, we're out. If it's not going the way I want, I'm out. To see you as a couple say, no, we're going to kind of hunker down, be angry, ask God, where are you? Trust your spouse that he's got the best intention for you. Those are really good learnings for all of us. And I think that's your lives and your story is such a testament to that. So thank you. Amazing. I know I'm gonna be featuring some of your blog posts up on our website so that the conversation can continue, because I think the story, because I know there's a lot of viewers who are saying, I'm with you, Jeff. This is really hard. And I know there's a lot of viewers, Heather, for you, saying, I'm on this other end and this is tough. And I want to be that person to believe in the promises of God, have that kind of faith to carry on and say, okay, it might not be the life I thought, but you can make it better and redeem it and make it something I never would have expected. So thank you both for being here. Really appreciate your thoughts and your love story.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thanks. And I really haven't heard it, so it was really special for that. And Joanna, thanks for being here too.
Yeah, it's great. I'm privileged to sit in on the conversation.
What a beautiful story, and I hope you enjoyed that show. That was episode number 42, previously aired only online on seehearlove.com and on our See Hear Love YouTube channel, and has been one of our top viewed shows by viewers all over the world. I hope you also learned something, like I did, from this conversation with Heather and Jeff. The lasting, healthy, and strong marriage is all about choosing one another, no matter what. Such good learnings in that show with Jeff and Heather Smythe. Well, thanks for watching. Make sure to connect with us on seehearlove.com and click on our Say Hello button on the top of our website if you have any questions at all or comments that you want to share with us about the show. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, See Hear Love. We so appreciate your support and are so very thankful for our sponsors and donors who help make this show possible. And never forget that you are seen, you are heard, and you are deeply loved by God. We'll see you next time.